Hello everyone, I'm Karen James, Marketing Director at Twofold. I'm going to wait a few minutes just to see, I can see a few more people attending. In the meantime, could you raise your hands to confirm you can hear us okay?
Yep, they can hear us loud and clear. That's brilliant.
Good, that's great. Okay, so we'll just wait a few more minutes. We've got a few more people joining that I can see. So I'll wait a couple more minutes and then we'll start. Okay, I was just waiting for a few more people to join. For anyone that's just joined in the last few 30 seconds or so, would it be possible you can raise your hands to just let us know that you can hear everything okay? That's all good. Okay, well, we'll begin. So, as I said, hello everyone, I'm Karen James, Marketing Director at Twofold, and I'm here today to present today's webinar focusing on human resources and solutions which can meet and empower the challenges faced by HR teams today. Okay, that's great. So let's start. So this is the agenda today. You have myself, I'm the one on the left, accompanied by Richard Cavilla, Regional Sales Director for DocuWare. We will go for a short presentation discussing how technology can work as part of a robust solution for HR departments, and then transition from there into a live demonstration showing a simple recruiting and employee onboarding workflow. Then finishing up with a Q&A session. Please ask questions through the webinar. Everyone is on mute, but and we will address any questions at the end. We've been recording this webinar and sending out a link later today. So just a quick, before we start the slides, a quick 30 seconds on who Twofold are. Our mission is to ensure that you can meet the challenges of ever-increasing volumes of paper and data. We do this by offering best-in-breed products and solutions and customer service, thereby empowering your business to work faster and smarter. So I think we can all agree that over the last few months or so, the way businesses operate has changed. As a world, we have jumped into a new normal. Employers are working remotely more so than ever, and this change has been forced on a huge number of businesses. And for many businesses, they are just not ready for it. Systems and processes have been designed around people being physically in the workplace. And one of the great challenges we are currently seeing is how HR documentation and process is being tested. It is a reality that HR is crucial to all businesses, maybe even more today. So in today's maybe even more so in today's changing climate. So what challenges are HR teams facing today? We're just going to launch a poll. We'll give you a few minutes on the poll, and you can tick as many boxes as you feel relevant to your business. So what challenges? We've put some up there. We see maintaining regular employee communication, compliance to data protection policies and procedures, sharing important documents with employees working from home, simple storage and retrieval of employee files, and employee onboarding. Once we'll wait for the results to come in, and after the poll, I'm going to hand over to Richard for the results in the next section of the webinar, the technology section.
So thank you, Karen. So I'm Richard Kabila from DocuWare. Thank you for the introduction. So today I'm going to be taking you through a demonstration of how DocuWare can assist organisations with HR. Now, thank you for filling out the poll. I'm going to share the results now just to see, and you can hopefully see that on screen. So it's quite interesting. The most popular, I guess, is maintaining regular employee communication, and that's probably more so true than ever, particularly now with people working remotely. And one of the great things about the solutions Twofold can provide, particularly with DocuWare, we can enable organisations to work remotely. It's quite interesting. The employee onboarding is only at 43% in the poll. We are actually going to be taking you through an employee onboarding process in the demonstration, but also as well what's quite common and probably what we see a lot when we implement DocuWare into customers is just the real simple storage and retrieval of documents. So that's quite high up there as well. So I'm just going to hide the poll. I'll give you a little bit of introduction now into some of the things we can do with Twofold and DocuWare. So first and foremost, DocuWare solution, we're very powerful in the HR space. But if we kind of backtrack from that, DocuWare also provides an excellent platform as a document management system. The system has been in existence for nearly 30 years now. And as a starting point, one of the key areas is managing or digitizing and going paperless. I think now we can all agree in the current climate, the way we worked in the office has completely changed. We're no longer available to share paper documents. Everyone's working remotely. So we need to be able to provide the tools to do that. But it's not just about removing paper. It's also how we kind of manage how you retrieve documents. So for example, if you're currently using your traditional Windows file shares, these currently can be very tricky to access. You may be relying on unreliable VPNs and slow internet connection speeds. So in the demonstration, not only are we going to look at the HR procedures, we're also going to see how we can just manage the simple kind of day-to-day processes of documents. Also very important, and one of the things we like to address in DocuWare, and particularly in the HR department, is how we can ensure privacy. Obviously, HR managers need to have access to sensitive employee information, but also as well, employees need to have access to documents as well. So it's important that we segregate that information. And in the DocuWare solution, we can be very granular on who we give access to what in the system. Very important as well is to be able to offer your employees and anyone in the organization the ability to access their workflows and their documents at any time, regardless of where they are. So it could be a simple case of an employee excuse me, an employee wanting to look at documents that relate to them, or it could be your organization has sent out some new procedures and you need to ensure your employees have viewed them. Now, really importantly, and where kind of DocuWare and the Twofold solutions come into play, is how we can start to assist organizations in saving time, particularly to avoid repetitive and kind of manual tasks. Now, this could be simply by a workflow that maintains the document workflow in the HR function, or it could simply be automating data capture from documents. So some of the key areas that we can handle with DocuWare, you're not going to see everything today because there is a vast amount of things we can do, but particularly in the top two, the recruiting and onboarding, we're going to focus on those two elements today in the demonstration. But above that, we can also start to look at managing appraisals, time off management, certifications. So it could be that you have training certificates or work permits. We can manage that all within DocuWare and have retention periods. But I think what's also important as well is to look at the legal compliance, so particularly around things like GDPR, but it could also be kind of compliances that are specific to your industry. And at the end of all that, we have workflows that can manage the employee separation phase. So before we move into the demonstration, let's just have a kind of recap on some of the benefits that we can introduce with DocuWare. And I think first and foremost, using DocuWare in an HR function shows confidence to your employees. You're able to action your workflow tasks very quickly, and you can give them the peace of mind that they're working in a very professional environment. But I think what's important here is it's not about a document management system or workflows, it's about the processes that you're doing. And we want DocuWare and the solution to be able to manage these processes behind the scenes and allow you to focus on your core business. Now, obviously businesses are ever changing, and I think we can probably agree even more so than ever. we need to be able to react very quickly to change. Now, this could be the quick implementation of new workflows or new compliances within the organisation. And DocuWare is a very feature-rich solution that will allow you to even configure your own workflows very quickly. So we're going to move into a demonstration now. We're going to take a look at a simple recruiting and onboarding process. Now, to set the scene and give you a bit of an introduction to what the DocuWare platform looks like, essentially it's available in the cloud, which means it's available everywhere. Now, typically users, whether they're HR or employees, can access the DocuWare system via a web browser. Now, we also do have mobile applications as well. So even if you're not behind your laptop or you're traveling or you're out walking the dog, you can still access all your documentation, share documents, view documents, but also as well action any tasks. So to set the scene for the demonstration, we've got in front of us the actual DocuWare screen, and this is broken down into two areas. So first and foremost, on the right-hand side, we have our document viewer. And throughout the demonstration, we'll start to see some documents appearing. And then on the left-hand side, we have our workspace. And this is broken down into a number of areas. We have what's called document trays, and document trays allow users to bring in documents into the DocuWare system. And we kind of think of document trays as a digital version of a physical paper tray you may have on your desk. Now, in addition to this, we also have the ability to search for documents, and we can see HR files in here. And as we go through the demonstration, we'll see how we can access these documents and search for information. And probably very importantly for me is around tasks and lists. And we'll see in the workflow various tasks appearing for the people that are interacting with the process. Now, just to set the scene, we've got 3 people that are going to be involved in the demonstration. We've got Simon Stone, who is the HR manager, and his role as the HR manager, as you can probably imagine, is to basically oversee all of the HR functions. We also have Elizabeth Cash in another browser, and Elizabeth Cash is the finance manager, and she's effectively looking to fulfill a new vacancy. And finally, we have Joe Candidate, and Joe, he is applying for a job within the organisation. So as we go through the workflow, you'll see me logging in and out of various different people. But first and foremost, Elizabeth Cash has a new job role that she wants to fill. Now, everything you see in the DocuWare screen, we can customize to exactly what you want. So typically, a lot of the workflows that you'd look at would be very similar. But in the case that you may want to kind of bespoke a workflow or anything like that, we can do that within DocuWare. So to begin with, Elizabeth wants to fill the vacancy, and what we've got and within DocuWare is what we call DocuWare forms, and these are essentially web forms that we can publish to individuals within the organisation, but also as well to the public. Now, to kick off the new hire requisition workflow to fulfill the job role, I've got a DocuWare form in front of us. It looks pretty straightforward, almost pretty plain. Now, these DocuWare forms can be fully customizable and fully branded to your organisation. So Elizabeth wants to kick off the workflow, and we can see that we've already pre-filled out some of the information on the form for the purposes of the demonstration, but we're looking for an accountant, the job description, staff accountant. We're going to put in some other bits of information, maybe the skill sets we're looking for. Now, when Elizabeth submits that form, the form will then notify the HR department of the vacancy request. So if I log back in as Simon Stone, and we'll just wait for the task to come through shortly. Whilst we're waiting for that, we can take a quick look at some of the other options we've got here. So as HR manager, obviously Simon Stone has more access to documents than kind of standard employees. So as we touched on earlier, we can segregate the documents and the access depending on who they are within the organisation. We also have a view of employee records. So very quickly, the HR person can see who is obviously employed by the company, but also as well has quick access to some information. Maybe it's their address, maybe it's their hourly rate, if they've got any holiday left, and that type of thing. Now, what we can actually see here now is the tasks appeared. So Elizabeth Cash has submitted the form, and it's notified the HR department that somebody's requesting a job. So if I double click on my task, we can now see the form that Elizabeth Cash filled out. Now, in this workflow, and again, can be fully customizable, this now gives the option to the HR department to effectively reject the request for a new hire requisition. Maybe there's no budget for a new starter, or in this case, we're going to simply post it. Now, by hitting confirm on here, this is essentially Simon Stone is the HR manager confirming that he's now published the job to the public. So this could be on a recruiting platform, or it could simply be on a website. So if I hit confirm, let's imagine the job has now gone out to the general public, and we've got some interest, particularly from a guy called Joe Candidate. Now, I'm just going to drag a CV in from Joe Candidate. Now, the CV that we've brought into the system, I brought that in manually, but we could, in fact, interact with your email system. We can monitor a mailbox, but we could also interact with other third-party systems. So, for example, if a CV was uploaded via a web form or via the website, we could automatically route that into DocuWare. So first and foremost, we've got the CV from Joe Candidate, and Simon Stone is now going to store this into what we call our filing cabinet. Now, the filing cabinet within DocuWare is the permanent storage, and in order to store documents in there, we need to classify them. So what we can see now on the right-hand side is an image of the CV, so we can review that online. We can also review that via the web, via the mobile app. Now, before I store this, we need to classify it. So on the left-hand side, we can now see we have our what we call index fields. And index fields are pieces of data that relate to a document. So, for example, to store this CV, we need to capture some information. So I've already pre-filled some information. We've got the first name, we've got the last name, we've got the address and various other bits, but we can also add key bits of information. So to add information to the index fields is very simple. I could simply start typing, or I could simply drag my mouse and add data to that. And as we'll see on the left-hand side, we're now populating some further skills from Joe Candidate. So I'm happy with this, and then I'm going to store the CV into DocuWare. So this is now going to trigger the workflow for somebody in the HR department to essentially assign this application to Elizabeth Cash. So we can see a task that's appeared, and it's basically asking the HR department to review the document. So if I double click on my task, I can now see the CV again. So even if somebody else has stored the document, anyone who has access to the information can now view this within DocuWare. So we've got a couple of options here. HR could flat out reject it. It could be that somebody's just sent in a CV which makes no sense at all, or there's no job open. And by rejecting that, we could then notify via email the person that sent it in, basically saying that we don't have a job vacancy available. Now, if we do reject that, we still keep the CV in the system. We've still got a record of all the skill set, and we can push this into our talent pool. So it could be in the future when another job vacancy appears, that before we publish that to the public, we can actually look at the talent pool and start to see whether there may be somebody that's already applied for a job that we can now speak to. In this case, I'm just going to assign this CV to Elizabeth Cash so she can review it prior to an interview. So to do that, it's very simple. I've got a drop-down list, and I'm going to select Elizabeth Cash, and I'm going to say that the person is applying for staff accountant. So I'm going to hit confirm, and now currently that's all Simon's task completed. So if I now go back over to Elizabeth Cash and I log on to her DocuWare screen, we can now see a task that will appear shortly. But before I do that, let's have a look at Joe Candidate's email. So we've received the CV, and we've automatically notified Joe Candidate that we're currently reviewing it and we'll be in touch very shortly. Now, if I go back into Elizabeth Cash, just wait for the task to appear. And whilst we're waiting for that task, I will here we go, it's just come through. Excellent. So bearing in mind we're working on the internet at the moment, so the workflow sometimes it usually comes through within 1 or 2 seconds, maybe at other times 10 seconds. So we can now see the task that's come through to Elizabeth, and it's basically advising her that somebody sent in a CV in relation to the job that she's advertised, and can she review it and then make a decision upon that. So by double clicking on this, again in the viewer, we can see the CV, and Elizabeth Cash can now see by viewing, we've got a digital stamp on the screen, and this is a visual indication to users that something's happened to that document. So if we can imagine a kind of traditional rubber stamp, we can do this in DocuWare in a digital format. We also have a full audit trail of what's gone on with the document, who's opened it, who's accessed it, who's done a workflow task. And later on in the demonstration, I'll be able to show you that. So currently, we now have a task for Elizabeth Cash, and she's got a couple of options. So she's reviewed the CV. She could simply say, I want to get a second opinion, so we can click on a next reviewer. We can simply reject it, and that'll go back to the HR department, where we can then notify the applicant, or we can arrange an interview. Now, in this case, I'm going to arrange it by phone because obviously everyone's working remotely. So I can give some information, and we're going to say we're going to do it by Microsoft Teams. So I'm just going to add a comment in here. And I'm going to give the HR department 3 options for dates for the interview. So first and foremost, I'm going to select date number 1. I'm going to give them a second option, and then finally a third option. Now, by hitting confirm on here, when I log back in as Simon Stone, we'll shortly get a task advising him that Elizabeth's happy with the applicant and that she wants to invite Joe candidate in for the interview. So I'll just give that a couple of seconds to come through. And we now have the task. So the task is now advising Simon Stone that he needs to arrange the interview with the candidate. So in this case, if we can imagine, Simon's now been on the phone to Joe candidate, and they've agreed upon an interview time. So we're just going to say, for the purpose of the demonstration, the interview is going to be on the 13th of May. So by hitting confirm on here, we're going to get a notification to Elizabeth Cash regarding the interview, but also as well, in my email, you'll see here now that Joe candidate has been notified of an interview. So what we're seeing currently is all these documents going into the system, the workflow being automated, but at the same time, everyone's being notified by what's happening without anyone having to kind of proactively go in there and think about kind of what the next step is. So now if I go into my DocuWare screen as Elizabeth Cash, we can now see that we've got a task here. So if we can imagine that the interview's taken place and we're all happy, again, we've got an additional tab on here, or stamp on here, that shows kind of what's going on. And Elizabeth's decided, yes, I want to hire Joe candidate. So if I click on hire, we can give some details here. So let's hire him. And by confirming this, it will now notify the HR department that Elizabeth has done the interview and that they're happy. So just to recap where we've gone so far. So Elizabeth has had a kind of request for a vacancy. The HR team has been notified by that. They've published the vacancy to the public, and we've had Joe candidate come in for an interview, and we're now able to kind of move on with the recruiting process. So if I log back in as Simon Stone, the interview was a success. Elizabeth wants to hire him. So now we've got a task that's basically saying that we need to send an offer letter to to Joe. Now, a couple of ways we can do this. We can actually automatically generate documents within DocuWare. In this case, I'm going to simply drag over a Word document that we created earlier. And by dragging this into my tray, I can now store this into the DocuWare filing cabinet. And by storing the document, again, we need to classify it. So very simply, I could start typing, or with simple clicking, I can highlight text on the page. I can make use of drop-down lists, and I can also click on text and populate the information. So we're storing the original of the offer letter that we sent out. So now Joe has got the letter, it's been posted out to him, but this could be a digital signature that we sent out. And now Joe has signed the document. So I've got a signed version of the offer letter that I'm going to drop into the DocuWare system. Again, bringing this back into the system could have been via a web form, or it could have been via some kind of recruitment platform, but also as well email. Now, if I store this offer letter into the system, we'll now see that it's actually signed. So this is the signed document we've brought in. So again, I'm going to quickly index it. I'm going to add a status that this is now complete, and I'm also just going to add Joe's information. Now, when I hit store on this, this will obviously continue to trigger the workflow. I'm just going to confirm that I've sent the offer letter. But before we move into the workflow, let's actually have a look at the documents that we've stored today. So if I, in my storage, I want to be a bit more specific. I just want to see purely what we've seen so far. So instead of seeing all the documents in the system, I can simply change my search, and I'm just going to specify today's date, then do a search. And now we can see all the documents so far. So the first document that came in was the new hire requisition. Then we have the resume or the CV, and we have offer letters and the signed offer letter. Now, all within one place and all with a simple search, I can now bring all that information together. So if you can imagine in a kind of unstructured environment, you may have an email somewhere in someone's mailbox, or you could have some documents, a Word document sitting in a Windows file share. Now, obviously, yes, they're accessible, but you still have to kind of scramble around finding that information. So with DocuWare, we can bring all the documents together under one simple search criteria. So we've now received the offer letter or the signed offer letter, and very shortly, if I just log over to Elizabeth Cash, just wait for my task to come through. Let's just store that document again. I'm just going to store that a second time for the workflow. And very shortly, we should see a task come through to Elizabeth Cash saying that we can now complete the onboarding process. So I'm just going to wait for that to come through. And whilst we're waiting for that, if we actually look at the search criteria from Elizabeth Cash, she has slightly different options. So if I do a search on kind of nothing, it's only going to bring back documents that Elizabeth has the ability to see. So I'm still waiting for my task to come through, so bear with me. And we can see the task has now appeared, again, at the mercy of the internet, which is always excellent in a live demonstration. So we've stored the signed offer letter, and now it's just asking the HR department to finalise a start date with the candidate. So if I double click on my finalise start date, we can now agree upon the date that Joe candidate's going to start. So if I select a date, I'm just going to say in this example, the 29th of May, I'm going to hit confirm. And this is now going to alert not only the candidate or Joe candidate that we've got a start date, but it's also going to ask him to now provide some further information. So if I log back in as or look in the mailbox of Joe candidate, we can now actually see that he's received an email basically saying, yes, this is brilliant, we want to hire you, and the start date is the 29th of May, but can you now please provide some information? Now, this is, again, a DocuWare form that's provided to the user. Now, again, these are all fully customizable. So what we can see here is I've already pre-populated some information. So we've got the first name, last name, we've got his address, we've got a national insurance number, but we can also put a digital signature on the page as well. Now, by submitting this form, we've essentially captured data from Joe candidate, and we can now use this somewhere within the DocuWare system. So if I hit submit and go back into Simon Stone and do a search, we can now see that we've just had 3 documents that have been generated. Now, in my demonstration, these are US documents, but obviously in the UK, we'd be using our own documents. Absolutely fine. DocuWare handles all types of documents, whether you're in the UK, US. So just for the purpose of the demonstration, we've got some US documents. Now, if I actually click on the first one, so we've got an I-9, which is essentially eligibility to work. But what we've got is the data that Joe's filled out from the web form. So we've captured the data once, but we're now able to overlay that into multiple forms. So if I click on the emergency contact form, we can now see we've got his national insurance number, we've got his date of birth, and all this data has been populated from that single form that Joe filled out that he got via the email. If I click on the W4, which is a tax form, again, we can see information that has been populated. Now, if I go back to Elizabeth Cash, part of the onboarding process is for Elizabeth to actually ensure that before Joe candidate starts, that he's got everything he needs. So that could be a Windows login, it could be access to the CRM, ERP system, whatever it is. So if I double click on the task as Elizabeth Cash, we can now see it's asking for the provisioning request. So from my DocuWare screen, I can again open up a DocuWare form. Now, this provisioning request, again, can be fully customizable, but by filling out this form, we're essentially going to tell the workflow to notify different areas of the business to make sure that we have everything in line before Joe Candidate starts. So the form is intelligent. So if I look in the HR section, we could say, yes, we only need the standard options. Now, if we wanted to kind of have a little bit more complexity, so for example, Joe needs access to the travel expenses, or he needs access to, or we need business cards, we can click these options, and then within the workflow, this will notify the departments who will then need to obviously action that. Now, for the purpose of the demonstration, I'm going to keep it simple and keep it to the standard options, but let's have a look at what the IT piece could be. So we've got the standard options here. If I actually click on here, now we can start to look at how we can request, say, a laptop, access to Office 365, email access, and access to the intranet. Now, again, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to take off the IT manager, and I'm going to simply submit that form back into the DocuWare workflow. So I'm going to go back in as Simon Stone now, and Simon, as you see here, has the task, and it's basically now saying that we've received a provisioning request, and if I double click that, we can see it, and it's now asking Simon to obviously go away, make sure that everything's in order. That's all good. We've got the laptop, we've got the Windows login all set up, and now Simon can just confirm that that's all complete. And then to complete the loop by logging back on as Elizabeth Cash, she will receive a notification saying everything's now complete. We've got the laptop, we've got the Windows, we've got everything set up, and now the employee is ready to start. And that essentially could be a simple recruitment and onboarding process within DocuWare. But it's fair to say there is also a lot more that we can do with that. As we saw in a couple of slides ago, we can handle various things, whether it be appraisals, holiday requests, compliance, anything you need to do, we can bring in to the DocuWare system. One thing I want to show you before we go from the demonstration is also the ability for folders. So I'm logged on as Elizabeth Cash here, and Elizabeth Cash has access to her employee files. Now, we have what we call virtual folders within DocuWare, and these essentially are kind of a more traditional approach for users to access documents. Now, Elizabeth only has access to her own employees, but if I log back on as Simon and I go into his folders, we can see here that he has access to a lot more. So if I go back, we can now see all the other employees within the organization. So DocuWare is a very flexible tool. Everything you've seen here can be customizable. Typically what we see with a lot of organizations is that there's a lot of similarities between the two. So that was a short demonstration. I hope you found that beneficial. So we're going to switch back over to the slides before moving on to a Q&A. So just to summarize on some of the things we've seen here, DocuWare enables people to work remotely very, very simply. And I think that's particularly important, particularly obviously with everyone working from home currently. But it makes it an excellent portal for communication to your employees. Now, that could simply be kind of HR-related documentation that you want to publish, or it could simply be that Joe Candidate wants to access his contract. Now, very simply, wherever he is in the world, he can access that very quickly. But also at the same time, every time people access something or store anything in DocuWare, everything has got a full audit trail. So not only can we see the workflow of who to make decisions, but also as well, we can see who's opened a document, we can see who's clicked in it, and we can also see who shared that document as well. Now, I think the bottom point here, maintain business continuity. Now, regardless if you're in the office or not, we can continue to maintain access to documentation. We can continue to keep the workflows moving. And I think that's particularly important right now. So just before we move on to Q&A, I just want to give you an example of one of the recent projects we worked on with Twofold. It was quite an interesting one. It was a warehouse company in London. And the reason we picked this is because there was a really, really diverse workforce. So one of the key problems they had was just simple storage and retrieval of documents. About 75% of their office floor was actually taken up with employee files. And it was a full-time job just to access these files and also store them. But they were also finding problems where people were filing documents in the wrong place, so there was a delay in being able to respond to queries, but also as well important information such as forklift truck certificates and driving licenses were missing. But one of the key things with the diverse workforce is many of them need to have proof that they could work in the UK. And one of the big problems, and again, it was almost a full-time job to maintain, was keeping on top of the expiry dates on visas, on permits and return to work. Somebody was having to manually go in and kind of monitor that. Now, with the DocuWare workflow and with the retentions, we're able to build in a notification that would say, yes, the contract's about to expire, or we need to look at renewing the visa. And this was all managed directly within DocuWare. But on top of that, and at this company, for some reason, they had a large area of handling disciplinary matters. So we built workflows to maintain that as well. So not only could we notify the employee, but it was also keeping kind of an automated record on the employee file of any issues. On top of that, we also took care of the annual leave management and timesheet management as well. Now, to deploy that solution, we did it in about 5 days, so it's very quick. Now, the nature of obviously the way or what we deploy within DocuWare, it could be that you want to start on a very small area, or it could be you want to tackle the kind of whole HR department. Now, moving on to the Q&A. So, Karen.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that, Richard. Always interesting when you've got a live demo going on and the mercy of the internet. So let's have a look at the questions we've got coming through. Will we get copies of the slides? Yes, absolutely. We'll send a link out to the, we're recording the webinar anyway, so yes, we will send links out for that. So that's not a problem. One of the questions is, what about data security and compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can tackle that on the kind of number of levels. So first and foremost, DocuWare as a solution is very, very secure. We actually use, or we actually, our cloud is based on Microsoft Azure. So not only do we have the security involved, we also have the availability of the documents and solution as well. So in Azure, your data will be backed up 7 times, but no one has access to that apart from yourselves and the people that need to have access to it. But everything's encrypted as well. So any information that's passed from your laptop or phone into the DocuWare system can only be accessed by the DocuWare system alone. On top of that, as we've seen, we've got the user rights, so we can start to segregate who has access to what. And we can also make sure that we kind of maintain any compliances. Now, compliance is always an interesting question. It depends on the use case, but also as well, it could be simply the way we maintain, obviously, visas and passports and things like that.
Okay, that's great. We've got a couple more. I'll just choose a couple of them. We've got one of the webinar users uses an Oracle HR information system. Do we need to manually input data into the system, and how well does it integrate with HR systems?
Yep, so DocuWare is a platform, and integration is one of the key things for DocuWare. So we can effectively integrate with any system, whether it's an HR system or it could even be an ERP system or a CRM. Now, as we've seen, we've captured some data throughout the demonstration. So where Joe Candidate was filling out a form, that data, we've captured it once. So there's no point in kind of having to manually re-enter data somewhere else. So we can feed that data that we've extracted from DocuWare and pass that on into other systems as well. And essentially that will save time, but it will also start to remove any kind of human interaction and then any possible error.
Okay, that's great. Let's choose another one. Limitations on the system. Is it limited to employee numbers or sizes of files we store in it?
So DocuWare is fully scalable. So it could even be that you have a one-person HR system that you want to deploy, and we can absolutely do that. Now, DocuWare also as well, with the scalability, we scale up into the big corporate environments as well. So we could be talking thousands of users. Now, depending on obviously your requirement, we could have a simple, as I say, one user system, and then you only need to obviously buy the licensing for that one user system. As you start to scale up, then we can add more users and we can add more space to that. But the workflows that we've seen, we can add an infinite amount of workflows to that. So as your company evolves or there's new requirements, we can incorporate new workflows, or we can even edit the existing ones to meet the processes that you need to complete.
Okay, that's great. I'm just conscious of time, so any questions we haven't answered today, we will email answers out after the session to the asker. So I think really then next steps, we can, I put a link on there, we can do a personalised demo for you. We've obviously shown you only a small portion of the technology today with generic documents. So, you know, please feel free to get in touch if you'd like to see your documents put into the process. My email address is above, along with our phone number. So you know, you've got some contact details there. So thank you again for your time today. I hope it's been really useful. I look forward to speaking to you again soon. And most importantly, enjoy the rest of your day and the up and coming bank holiday. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
That's great. See you all soon.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.